Greeting my friends, I am back again, this time to speak to you on an important aspect of disaster planning, that is known as vulnerability analysis, which is the foundation for disaster planning. This aspect has to be understood by us in its totality. In order to understand what exactly is vulnerability, one has to understand where does it fit in the disaster cycle and the area of its exposure. What exactly we mean is disaster cycle has various components, and what we have to know is where exactly vulnerability fits in. Hence, in order that we understand clearly the area of exposure, we have to be specific about our thinking regarding any disaster. Let us now view a disaster cycle to understand the above. Friends, I am giving you a small little picture in which in the center it is written as disaster. Now look at the 90 degrees arrow, you will say an emergency has been created. The emergency, once it has been created due to the various sort of natural or man-made situations, the people who are at large in a given area are suffering. It can have various consequences. Buildings have collapsed, people have become homeless, etc., etc. What is the first thing that we require in such situations? We require search, rescue, first aid, firefighting, evacuation, communications, etc., etc. Now once you have got onto this job, the very next thing that comes is all these points that are coming into our notice, they are working, they are functioning, but from where they will go, where will the people go? They will go to a relief camp through evacuation. Now in this relief camp, we have to take care to ensure what? People are kept happy for a given time, and they are made to given such relief measures by which they can forget their difficulties and get back to life. The next step on that would be the rehabilitation. What we mean exactly by relief and rehabilitation is, relief is a temporary measure, rehabilitation is a little long-term measure. You may have camps wherein for 3-4 months they may be staying, and you got to look after them, give them skill training in order to ensure what? So that they can go back and be better citizens, if not what they were earlier on. Now this is known as rehabilitation. From there we jump on to the next stage known as recovery. Needless to mention here, friends, that once you have a disaster, the mental attitude of a person is absolutely in his shoes. So a person who is supposed to have come back from a camp is not in his pink of health as far as mental attitude is concerned. So recovery on that. Recovery on the second stage is, you might have lost your skill, in the sense you might have been working in a particular thing. Now thanks to the disaster, that particular thing is lost to you totally. Now you have to find out another aspect from which you can start functioning, and from which you can start earning, and by which you can carry on with your family. That is known as recovery. Now these are aspects which means they are the cycle which is coming in the form of human beings who are suffered, camps which are set up for their purpose, the rehabilitation where skills are given, and the recovery that is taking place. But what about the governmental aspects? We start with the word development. Once a situation has gone wherein so many problems have occurred, we got to think in terms of how to get back to original situation. That is known as development. In the first stage of development, we have a thing known as mitigation. What do you mean by mitigation? Let us say, for example, an earthquake situation has taken place and buildings have collapsed. It is said earthquakes don't kill, buildings kill. In other words, the material that you have used for various constructions, they may be responsible for killing of the persons or people getting killed. So in mitigation, what we have to think is, use such materials by which even in case they get damaged, even in case they fall, even in case they are totally destroyed, the persons who are living inside should not get so badly hurt that they will get killed. Now this aspect of it is known as, one of the aspects is known as mitigation. The other aspect of it is how to bring them back to the normal life. That aspect is known as mitigation. Now for this you require what? Preparedness. What do you mean by preparedness? You got to prepare a plan well in advance of a disaster. If you have a disaster and then you start preparing, you have already lost the race. In other words, what I am trying to hint out is, in this particular type of race, you have to be ready to think what exactly is the situation and how am I going to do. That is known as preparation. The next step to that is known as education and training. Now, this I can explain to you with your own course that you are undergoing. For example, the ministry has decided that teachers from all over India have to undergo this course. For what purpose? The purpose is very simple. We want to educate you and ensure that we give you a message. Message in what? What is a disaster? Why does it occur? How does it occur? What are the consequences of it? What we should do, what we should not do. This entire course is based on this known as education. But there is one more small little thing that you have got to keep in mind, and that thing is known as training. What exactly is training? It is the next step from education. For example, all of you who have undergone this course will not be a rescue person, will not be a first aider, will not be a firefighter, but some of you can become some of these things. Now that part of it is known as training. In other words, I got to train people into various concepts of giving assistance to the people who are involved, and that aspect is known as training. Is this sufficient? But training also involves various other aspects, like for example, I have to talk in terms of what type of training has to be given, how many days of training has to be given, what type of equipment has to be given, and how much of money will it cost. In other words, funding, financing. These are the aspects that have to be taken into account. Let us take the next step. It says social awareness. What do you mean by social awareness? Disaster management is not only an official idea. It is an idea which should get germinated in among the people's mind. The people should also understand that we are part and parcel of the disaster, and all these things that are happening are meant for helping us. This creation of this awareness is important so that they can participate in your plan and then help you out in getting ready for an emergency. This situation which I now explained to you with few of these wordings that I have given you in the form of circles is known as a disaster cycle. We now come to the next aspect. As far as our particular this thing is concerned, we are concerned today with three important aspects. Keeping in mind the disaster in the center, on to the right we have got what is known as preparedness, and on the left we have got education training, and on top we have got social awareness. Let us see as we go on in this class of mine how exactly all these three aspects will get into, or how they are weaved into a situation wherein you are in a position to know what exactly is your role. Now that you have seen a disaster cycle, you will be able to understand the subject of the day, vulnerability analysis in its totality. Since we will be talking about social awareness, education training as well as preparedness, since you have the basic idea that disasters are classified into two main categories, and they are known as, naturally you know it, natural and man-made. Now the concept that is there behind all this thing is, important aspect is whether a disaster is a natural one or a man-made. That is not the question, but it has to be specific area of destruction. What we mean by this, every disaster is not been designed to have an infinite amount of destruction. It has got a specific area. In other words, if you know this area well in advance, information is known to us to understand the areas which are likely to be affected, then our planning in such case of disasters likely to occur will become much better, and we will be in a position to tackle the situation in a much better way. The natural question that comes to our mind is, how can we come to know in advance? Who is going to give me this information? Who is given me this thing? Is there a booklet? Is there another database which I got to follow? The advanced information that we are talking has been simplified by a booklet produced by Government of India known as Vulnerability Atlas, which gives detailed knowledge and information to disaster managers as to which type of disaster is likely to strike their area. What we mean by this is, the Vulnerability Atlas that has been produced by the Government of India tells you your area, and it tells you how exactly the situation is and what are the types of disasters that are likely to strike your area. Once you know this, your next plan becomes much more easier. The next obvious question is, how does this vulnerability atlas help us to know in advance the area of disaster in a given place? This is a natural question that arises in everybody's mind. Now, having come to know the area of disaster, we have to prepare what is known as a template of earlier such disasters. What exactly I mean by earlier such disaster is, let us take for example an earthquake has happened in a given area at a given time. You prepare this thing as to how much of destruction took place in ABCD areas. If A has taken place say in 2 kilometers, B has taken place in 5 kilometers, C has taken place in 10 kilometers, D has taken place in 40 kilometers. Take that as your template. Subsequently, I will discuss in a little more detail what exactly I mean by this. But once we come to know this, the details regarding template will be discussed as I just now told you earlier. But the aspect of advanced knowledge of how much distance a particular disaster is likely to strike and this particular area of destruction, once we come to know, we are in a foundation stone known as vulnerability analysis. In other words, we come to know which are the areas where we are going to work and how we are going to work and how much we are going to work. Every area disaster has a specific area of vulnerability, which means effectiveness to cause damage in a given area. What we mean by this? For example, there is a cyclone, there is a flood, there is an earthquake. Each one of them has got specific vulnerability. Now, in this case, to understand this properly, the first requirement is to prepare a disaster management plan and of a specific area which is likely to be damaged. How do we do this? This we can do with the help of a template. There is another aspect that is got to be taken into consideration. Whenever we talk in terms of vulnerability, there is what is known as primary vulnerability, secondary vulnerability. What do you mean by primary vulnerability and secondary vulnerability? Let us say in an area A, which I will be now talking when I come to templates, in a given area A, if there is a LPG godown or a LPG storing place, the area A will get extended to B or C not only because of the particular damage that has taken place due to the earthquake or due to the cyclone or due to the flood, but you may also have secondary damages taking place because of this LPG thing that is there. In other words, that can increase the distance. So, in vulnerability, we have got to take into consideration A, the basic area which is going to be damaged because of the disaster, B, which is the areas which are going to be damaged because of the secondary area disaster thing that is taking place. So, both these things put together will give you the total area of vulnerability which is got to be taken into consideration for preparation of any plan. We now come to the next aspect. As per vulnerability atlas, certain areas are prone to earthquakes, certain other to cyclones and many other to floods. But the requirement of our planning is to be specific which for each one of these disasters. What do you mean by that? For example, sitting in a place like Himalayas, I have to think in terms of earthquakes, fine, but where is the cyclone there? There is no cyclone there. But preparing for cyclones somewhere in Himalayas is going to be waste of time and effort. So, this is what we mean by saying disaster specific. You got to be disaster specific so that you know what exactly you are trying to do and how you are going to go about it and what are the actions and activities that are likely to take place in case you are doing. The requirement in our planning to be specific for each one of these disasters, which means we should be disaster specific in our planning. Which actions to be taken because of a plan for mitigating problems created by a disaster is given or is known as vulnerability analysis. Hitherto or earlier, we have discussed something known as a template. We shall now see what exactly we mean by a template, how is it to be made, what are the ingredients that are required for making a template. Once we know the type of disaster that is likely to strike an area, we should prepare a template of an earlier earthquake of a different magnitudes, whether 6.2, 6.5, 7, 4.2, etc., which have taken place in different areas. A lessons learned so that we could minimize the damage and magnitude well in advance by preparation if it is kept ready. In fact, disaster preparation is not for stopping a disaster. Disaster preparation is for limiting the damage by training and keeping in readiness certain aspects so that we are in readiness to meet the situation. And this readiness is done in a better manner by what is known as a template. Now naturally, I have been talking template, template, template. I think at least I have mentioned 3 times. So natural question that has come to your mind is, what exactly and how do you do a template? A template is a scale boundary of a given disaster which has taken place in different area and defines the areas of maximum destruction A, heavy destruction B, moderate destruction C. This will be made in a radius of kilometers / miles depending upon the destruction that has taken place in a given area. In other words, we already know the destruction. So all that we have to do is, okay, this area A is so much kilometers, area B is so many kilometers, area C is so many kilometers. So you got that and put that radius. So such prepared templates, when placed, in other words, there is always a ground zero. So the question that will come to your mind is, how will I know my ground zero? Approximation. Ground zero cannot be determined by us well in advance. Or approximation you can do. In other words, you have to place the template in 4 or 5 different places and say this is what is going to take place in case this has happened. So when we place on the town, which gives us a fairly good idea regarding the radius of destruction that is likely to be caused. This helps us to a large extent in preparation of a plan. This preparation of a scale boundary of a given disaster is known as a template. To give you a better example or a better explanation, I am now showing you a figure of circles. In that you will find a small inner circle with a figure capital A. The capital A is radius of total destruction. In other words, this is the place where nothing is left, everything is finished. B is the next one, radius of heavy destruction. That means in this area maybe 10% less than A, but it is also equally bad. C, radius of moderate destruction. In other words, as compared to A and B, the C area is much better off, but still it is damaged. In other words, we come to the area known as D, which says radius of moderate damage. From destruction, I have come to the word damage. In other words, it is not totality, it is not too much, but there is some amount of damage. So from destruction, I have come down to the word damage. This is how the template looks. Only thing is, A is the ground zero, and I got to place this template at a given point and then say, okay, this is what is likely to take place in case my area is affected, A to earthquakes, B to cyclones. Templates can be prepared for all situations. You can prepare it for cyclone. Earlier cyclone might have given you some idea, so prepare on that. Prepare for flood situation, prepare for earthquake, but this is how we would be liking to do. What for? I will give you idea in a much better manner. From the above, we have come to know that vulnerability analysis is the foundation for disaster planning. What exactly we mean by disaster planning is, we should know which are the areas which are likely to be affected, so that well in advance we start preparing. That template that we have prepared gives us a fairly good idea how the situation can come in case it hits our area. So this is known as advanced this thing for preparing a disaster plan. It gives you a fairly good idea of various places that are likely to be affected by disaster and the actions to be taken for reducing the impact. Since we have earlier discussed evacuation, the point I am trying to make out is, you saw in a template that area A was complete evacuation. Why am I calling it for complete evacuation? If it's an area of total destruction, you can't be having public sitting there, all of them will become dead. So as soon as the warning is given to you, you should be in a position to move the people from that area, and that is the thing that we would like to take. That is why I say it is needless to emphasize that the area of complete destruction is also the area of complete evacuation. Apart from the certain areas need only partial evacuation. Why? Because we have seen there is an area C, there is an area D, where complete evacuation is not necessary. However, we may still have to plan certain amount of evacuation. So planning that evacuation is known as partial evacuation. And this protection also has to be given. For what? Certain places we are not evacuating, but strengthening of the buildings in mitigation. This aspect has been explained to you. Strengthening of a building has been explained to you in detail in one of our colleagues who has given you a lecture on earthquake planning. So that is how we start doing earthquake. The vulnerability analysis tells us what to do, how to do, and where to do. Now we come to the next. Vulnerability analysis also helps us in preparing various response teams. A little earlier I discussed about this. I said you will be in a position to know how exactly you are going to do this, what are the type of teams that are required. What do you mean by types of teams? I may be requiring a rescue team, I may be requiring a first aid team, I may be requiring a firefighting team. You will say, sir, government has given me all those things. No, government has a machinery, official, and it's called as official machinery. But the official machinery by itself is not sufficient to take care of the situation. In other words, as it has been explained to you earlier, one of the main criteria of a disaster is there is a gap in the number of persons who are working for giving mitigating value for the persons who are struck by disaster. In other words, resource lacking. So this resource lacking can be made up by volunteers, and these volunteers, they have got to be done what? They have got to be trained, they have got to be equipped. In other words, not only they have got to be trained, but also they have got to be given equipment. This also gives us insight to the training that has to be imparted to various volunteers in specific needs of response activities and the funds that are required for the same, as well as the time required. Now this is important, friends. What do you mean by time required? For example, let us say you will say, oh, the last earthquake was 2 years ago, maybe after another 2 years the next earthquake is going to happen, or the next cyclone is going to happen after 2 years, I can start next year. If you require 2,000 to 25,000 to 1 lakh volunteers, training 1 lakh or 20,000 or 2,000 volunteers has got its own specific need of time and energy that is to be spent by you. You cannot say, I will train them in 15 days, because that is not possible. In other words, this thinking by us that wait and watch, yuddha kale shastrabhyasa, these are things which should be avoided, and totally, if possible. In other words, be prepared so that you are in a position to face a situation. Now, to explain this particular thing to you, I have said the disaster is in the center: preparedness, education, training, social awareness. I talked to you about it a little earlier in a very peripheral manner. Now I will go into it in a little detail. For example, let us say you will say, what am I supposed to be doing in rescue? For example, an NDRF team comes to your situation. They are, say, let us say 2 teams of 16 people working together, but the area requires about 5 teams. So 2 teams cannot become 5 teams automatically. Volunteers of that given area have to join these teams, and they should know something about the training so that they can merge with that team that is there. If you say, I am volunteering, fine, but the next question that comes is, what do you know about this job? If you say, no, I got a lot of enthusiasm, but I don't know anything about the job. Your enthusiasm is good, but you are not having the skill is your weakness and my problem. So your weakness is you don't know how to do, and my problem is I don't know what to do with you. So preparedness is a thing which takes time. Similarly for first aid, I have got to take into consideration that what are the aspects of a first aid teams, how are they going to come and how are they going to work and how are they going to help the situation on ground, and what are the needful activities that are required to strengthen them, to equip them, to engage them in a better way by giving them augmentation. Augmentation means what? Giving them more manpower. More manpower in what? Skilled manpower who know what to do. And that aspect comes in this second slide, that is education, public training. Education part we already discussed. What I am doing with you is education, but what somebody else on ground will be doing is training. For example, you cannot teach ladder climbing in a lecture like this. I can't be training and saying, okay, you pitch up a ladder like this, rung by rung, you do left, right, and then climb. No, sir, that cannot be done. Nor can you be told how to do knots and lashings, nor can you be told how to do bandages, nor can you be given the stretcher drill. So what do you mean by that? What we mean by that is, you have got to be trained in the specific aspects of a stretcher training, of a bandaging, of a knots and lashing, of a climbing of a ladder. These are arts or skills which are got to be learnt by the volunteers. So this is what we mean by that. Then you come to the social awareness part of it. First question that you should ask yourself, 99.9% of us think government is responsible for looking after us. 100% you are correct. But Government by itself will not be able to do justice for the situation that has developed. In other words, the people at large, the public at large should know how exactly they are going to face the situation, what are the situations in which they can help the official machinery, how they are going to do this, and what aspects of responsibilities is resting on their shoulders. That is known as social awareness. We now come to the next aspect of utility. The utility of vulnerability analysis in preparation of a response rehabilitation plan and the steps that are to be taken gives us insights to understand the time required to prepare such teams, and this in turn makes us to know the time amount of work that is required to be done during the pre-disaster period. In other words, like we say peacetime, but I am using the word pre-disaster period. Pre-disaster period is a time for you to train, first become a volunteer, then go into a particular team, then get into the skills of those team, and then become a member. Let me tell you one thing, if you become a first aider or if you become a rescue person, you need not have to wait for a disaster to take place. In a given area, in your family atmosphere, in your community atmosphere, you will be a better citizen. You will be able to help people around by doing something which they cannot do because of your skill. So that is why I say the more you train and coordinate during pre-disasters, this makes you that much more perfect during a disaster. In other words, you become a better citizen than what you were earlier. So friends, this is the thing that you got to know about vulnerability analysis. But the most important thing, how to connect it up with you. So far we have discussed various aspects of pertaining to vulnerability and the analysis carried out thereby. That has led to us certain factual aspects of disaster management plans. In other words, vulnerability due to any disaster in a given area is the fundamental requirement for preparation of any plan, and this leads us to many aspects connected with vulnerability and further its implication on hazard, risk, resource analysis. In other words, what it means is from vulnerability we will be going to hazard, from hazard we are going to risk, risk to resource. In other words, all of them are connected. What I am trying to put into your mind is, by doing this particular aspect of vulnerability analysis, I have come to know what is the amount of damage that is likely to take place, what are the teams that are required to be trained, what are the skills that are to be given, how much time is required, what are the funds that are required. In other words, I have come to know well in advance what exactly is the requirement of my, let us say, state, my district, my community and my taluka, etc., so that we are in a position to meet the situation. And I am sure you as teachers will be able to appreciate these aspects, and in utility of any such work that is given to you or assigned to you, as we call, you will know how exactly you are a useful person than what you were earlier. In other words, as a teacher, you are a good person, you are an excellent man, but a teacher combined with first aider is not only an excellent man, he is a person in need. As they say, a friend in need is a friend indeed. A friend in need is where? In disaster is a friend indeed. In the last 20 to 25 minutes, I have discussed with you various aspects pertaining to vulnerability and the analysis carried out thereby that has led to us to certain factual aspects of disaster management plans. In other words, vulnerability due to any disaster in a given area is the fundamental requirement for preparation of any plan, and this leads us to many aspects connected with vulnerability and further its implications in hazard, risk, resource analysis with control measures, so that we have a proper plan to meet any situation. In other words, what I am trying to bring out is, you as teachers will become better citizens, you as teachers will become better human beings when you know how exactly we are going to fit in a particular team, how exactly we are going to work, what are the training that is to be carried out, so that you are in a position to give results to your friends, your own family and to the community at large. Vulnerability analysis, thus friends, is the most useful thing in preparation of a plan, and it gives you in depth into the planning. Thank you very much.